Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Pilates Lounge podcast. My name's Katie Crane. I am the Pilates professional. I have invited a pretty special guest onto the show with me today. Before we get started, I want to put it out there that some of you are going to think that this is a little bit woo-woo for you. I know it because I know Pilates instructors, but I really invite you today to open your mind to the potential and the possibilities of what it is that you actually hold inside of you without even realizing it. Today, my guest, Courtney Moore, we are going to be talking about intuition. Now, Courtney is an intuitive healer. Stick with me, people. She is trained in classical Chinese medicine and she is highly skilled in energy work. Courtney has a clinic in San Francisco in America where she offers acupuncture, bodywork, and Reiki, and also offers intuitive readings to clients around the world. So if this type of thing does float your boat, then you will be able to reach out to Courtney after the show. Courtney recently launched the Liberated Body, a 12-week course on excavating and releasing the energetic and emotional roots of pain in the body. Now, I'm thrilled to be talking to Courtney today because this is totally my jam. But I know that not everybody is open to this type of work or this type of discussion. As a Pilates professional with over 20 years of experience, I can tell you now, friends, if you can tap into your own intuitive powers, then you will be able to serve your clients in a way that is so powerful and so unique. So welcome to the show, Courtney. I would love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about how you got to this point in your career.
Katie, what a great lead-in. Thank you for all of that. And I just want to speak to that woo-woo point first. You know, this was not my career path that I intended. I was a very good student. I got into a very good college. I intended to go the pre-med route. I started to take all the classes, all the science, all the math. And I realized pretty quickly the tools that Western medicine had weren't interesting to me. I value them. I don't reject Western medicine like I think plenty of people in the woo world do. But I didn't want to spend my life talking about pharmaceuticals and surgery. And I could just see that was the focus. That was going to be every conversation I had for the rest of my career. And so I took some time off and I actually went to massage school in New Zealand, down where you folks are. And it changed my life. I did so much of my own healing. I really learned about the body as this complex, layered part of self. I think Western medicine still sort of treats it like you have your brain and it's attached to a body. And we're just going to do stuff to the chemical bag of your body, maybe add some chemicals, maybe cut some stuff out of it and then do some chemicals, on top of that. But when you do massage, when you do any form of body work, you learn how integrated the body is with the mind, the heart, the emotions, the spirit. And that was a lot of my massage training. And while I was in massage school, I saw someone do an acupuncture demonstration. And I just thought, oh, how simple. I'll just swap out Chinese medicine for Western medicine. I was 20. It was very impulsive. I do wish I would have explored some other career paths, but I think it was what I was meant to do. And I'm happy I'm an acupuncturist. I think acupuncture, Chinese medicine has been around for thousands of years. It was the primary medicine for an entire continent for millennia. So it is in its own way very scientific. It doesn't necessarily fit our metrics for Western scientific studies, but it's empirically and through the different, data collection systems that have existed, it's really very grounded in a body, in practical experience. And so I became an acupuncturist. And I was, in Chinese medicine, for those who don't know, we really rely on the pulse as a primary diagnostic method. And the pulse is very complex. It's not just the rate. There's very subtle characteristics and positions that we measure. And I went through this terrible breakup. I was so heartbroken. My teacher took my pulse and he told me my pulse was my heart pulse, was like the furies of Greek mythology were flying out of my heart. And something was transmitted in that moment because when I took people's heart pulses, I saw these pictures, these images. And it was weird at first, but I would have conversations with them. And I bet a lot of your listeners have had some kind of similar experience where just an image pops into their mind, or a song, a phrase, a book that doesn't necessarily make sense in the moment, but it's like, hey, maybe you want to check this out. And when you follow that pop, that hit, something interesting always happens, right? It's not necessarily like the rainbows come out and there's birds are singing and we've solved everything. But that hit always leads you down a really interesting road. And so I kept following these hits of the pulse diagnosis pictures, and I wanted to develop them. I wanted to get more refined at this skill, more intentional and more refined. So that led me to psychic school, which now I know we're getting into the deep woo. And I say that because I had so much resistance to the woo when I started out. Like Chinese medicine has sort of a range of woo. And when I started practicing, I rejected a lot of what I perceived as woo. And I was just like, you know what? We're getting into rest and digest. We're getting some endorphins going in the body. We're, encouraging homeostasis. And I was frankly a really bad acupuncturist. And when I finally started buying into some of the theory, people started getting much better results. So I was like, okay, I'm going to buy in and we're going to see what happens. And it was so weird and cool. I loved psychic school. And the principle behind psychic school, really, to start, and I mean this for every single person listening to this, we are all psychic. We're all intuitive. We all have that ESP. We all have that ability to pick up on energy that we can't necessarily see and doesn't necessarily make sense, but we are perceiving it. And so in psychic school, you just develop that. You take that natural ability that, it's just like we have sight, we have taste, and we have intuition. And so you just you learn different skills to develop the intuition. And that's what psychic readings are. It's me closing my eyes and tapping into someone's energy field and perceiving, even through a computer screen across a continent, perceiving someone's energy. And, I think for a lot of people who work hands-on with people, that subtle component of a person's energetic field becomes more and more and more apparent. So at this point, I've been doing body work for 20 years. And after, 5 or 10 years of doing body work, it was just ridiculous to me not to consider that. You spend an hour touching someone and you can leave that experience and feel their emotions. You can know things about their relationships that you haven't discussed, but you feel it. You take it on. And so all of those experiences really created the practitioner I am today. And I feel very strongly about anyone who works with bodies to develop that skill because it will always benefit your client and your sessions. I really believe that.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's so interesting, isn't it, that I feel like the Western medicine, it doesn't encourage us to utilize this, something that is innate in us, and it actually almost, hoo-hoos it. So then people are scared, maybe, I would assume, people are scared to speak up or scared to accept that maybe it's like people are taught that they don't know enough, that they don't have the answers. Hand over your power to somebody else. That's the best thing for you. It just blows me away that this is the way that we're actually taught.
I could not agree more. And I have to say, I'm trying to find the name of the book. Maybe I'll find it. You can throw it in the show notes. There was a memoir written by a physician in San Francisco who had chronic illness, and Western medicine was just really letting her down. And she felt awful, that deep chronic fatigue and constant colds, that kind of thing. So she went on this kind of healing journey, which is what the book's about. And in it, she really discovers the power of her own intuition, her ability to know what's going on with her body, more than a test or imaging or what some other physician says. And as part of that journey, she started talking to other doctors, and she was amazed at how many doctors were like, oh my God, yes, like this happens to me. I get these hits. I have these feelings, but we're not supposed to talk about that. That's not supposed to be a part of of our very, kind of like masculine technological medicine. But they were so excited. It's really sweet to read about in the book. They're so excited to get together in these little support groups and talk about these phenomenon, which again, I think that feels so woo-woo, bizarre, foreign if you don't have a sense that that's part of being a human being and a practitioner. And then once you do, it's so obvious. It's, again, it's just like, yes, I have eyes so I can see. I have a brain so I have intuition. They all go hand in hand, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with a group which I've been with for, golly gosh, maybe 15 years now. And we do Reiki together online once a week. So within our group, somebody can have a family member or a friend and they send a photo, where they're from and all that sort of stuff. And there's somebody from Russia, people from the States, people in Australia, and we all get together and do this Reiki within our own home. And it's amazing. Some people pull so much energy from your hands. Not everybody does, but we always talk about it afterwards. Where did you feel the most energy and what was the pull like? And it's definitely taken a while to improve on the skill, I feel like. With Reiki, it's universal energy, so it's there regardless, but it's taken a while to really sit in that experience. And it just blows me away every time my hands always I've got to rub them together because they get itchy. It's unreal.
That is so cool. What a great offering. That's really powerful. Yeah.
And it's just a really nice friendship to have with people that you're sitting together in your own house, but all, sharing that experience and giving to somebody else. It's really cool. So explain to our listeners, Courtney, what is intuitive medicine? Like, how does it actually work then?
Yeah, well, let's start with talking about what is intuition. And I have a definition of intuition I really like, which is knowing something without knowing why or how you know it. I think a lot of times, as you sort of alluded to when we were chatting beforehand, you know something, but you can see how it's like, oh yeah, maybe I read that in a textbook once, or oh yeah, I've seen this pattern in my patient, so likely that's going on with this person in front of me also. That's still a wonderful skill, that sort of educated sense of things, pattern recognition. But intuition, it's really knowing something and being like, I have no idea right now. Katie, we're working together. I'm working on your shoulder and I just got the lyrics to Under Pressure. Does that mean anything to you? Why is that song running through my head? And the person who gets the intuitive hit doesn't necessarily know, right? Like me sharing that with you, I could be like, well, I think that means you must be under so much stress. And you're like, no, that's the song I sing with my best friend. She's going through a hard time right now. I want to call her and connect with her. So it's just knowing something without knowing how or why you know it. And intuitive medicine is using that as we interact with the body. And so a classic medical intuitive likes to go into like a body scan with zero information. I don't want to know why you're here. I don't want to know your medical history. I don't want to know how old you are. I just want to know that you have a body and you want me to look at it. You're giving me permission to look at your energy. And then they kind of scan through and they tell you, okay, I'm perceiving this and this, and this is standing out to me. I see some of these emotions here. I see some stagnation here, whatever the thing is. And then once that's established, then you can have deeper conversations with the person. There's a famous medical intuitive named Tina Zion, who I studied with. She wrote 2 books, Medical Intuition and Advanced Medical Intuition. And she wrote a number of books on Reiki too. She's a big Reiki practitioner and fan. And Tina always says, first of all, you follow the pop, the thing that like just jumps into your head. That's intuition, not the thing you have to like search for and hem and haw over. You just follow the pop. And then she also is so big on like, and you just read the pictures you're getting, the images you're getting without interpreting, because we are not physicians as medical intuitive practitioners. I have my Chinese medicine background, but I'm still not a physician. I cannot diagnose cancer or colitis or heart disease. It would be totally unethical and inappropriate for me to try to do that. So instead, I just say, well, I'm looking at a heart and it just looks like the heart is stuffed with cotton. It's like a cotton stuffed heart. There's all this white stuff inside of it. And then it's up to the client. Like, first of all, what does that mean to you? Does that remind you of a plush you had when you were a kid and you have associations with your dad, blah, 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 blah? Or do you want to go follow up with your physician? Do you want to say, listen, I'm concerned about my arteries. Could we do some kind of testing just to see what's going going on here. And a lot of the famous medical intuitives in history, like Carolyn Mace, she's another one who's written many, many books on medical intuition. She worked with a doctor for several years. And so it was sort of like she would look for the things that maybe he was missing, and he would follow up with the imaging and the testing and the treatments that were appropriate. So really, that's intuitive medicine. It's using your intuition, that pop of information that you don't have any control over, and just following it, which is really scary. You know, like as a body worker, as an acupuncturist, I like having a structure to my sessions. I like being able to say, we're going to spend half an hour in the upper body, half an hour in the lower body, whatever the breakdown is. And with, an intuitive reading, you have no idea what's going to come up. You just have to say, okay, we've got an hour together. We're going to see what kind of information arises. We're going to follow those threads together, and we're going to hope that you really get something out of our time together. Ultimately, it's always, of course, about empowering the person to make better decisions. That's our goal. Our goal is not to be in some weird power position where like we know more than you do. It's just to give the client more information, more options, more insights that they get to follow up on.
So then I imagine it's still, even though it's your intuition and it's something that we all have, I imagine it's still something that you need to learn to harness, because how do I know that it's my intuition and not just the monkey on my back? Because if I'm somebody who constantly is talking to myself anyway, constantly asking questions, when do I discern what is intuition and what is, forced perception or whatever you want to call it?
Absolutely. It's such a good question. That's why Tina really emphasizes the pop, because there's sort of a difference between, oh, wow, I'm thinking of a heart with stuff with cotton versus like, I'm spinning over this. I'm searching for this. I'm contemplating this. That's not intuition when you find yourself in that. And I think you're absolutely right. If working with intuition is something you want to prioritize, developing a meditation practice, maybe taking some of the intuitive meditation classes that are always like the first step into that world, that will help you recognize the cues your own body and psyche give you about when it's more anxiety or fear or thought processing versus intuition, insight, wisdom, really. I know for me, a big one is that when I'm reading for people, and reading for people is very intimidating because you're just pulling things out of thin air and hoping they land well. And so I'm, reading things, nervous, does this land at all? And I will get very dizzy when I say something that is very important and accurate. And that is so consistent. Every time I get that hit, I'll check in with them and they're like, oh yeah, that one like super rang true for me. And everyone's going to have their own little cues. There's something that happens internally where you get the sort of thumbs up, yes, you're onto it, keep following that thread. And so, yeah, I do think, meditation can mean so many things to so many people, but I think that is a primary way of cultivating this skill, practice and meditation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you work with somebody, what does that session look like? Like, do they come to you with a preconceived idea of what they're going to receive from you? Or I imagine somebody's got to be pretty open to come and see you in the first place. So do you tend to see people who are at the end of the road, I've tried everything, what the heck, I'm going to try this anyway? Or are they people that would generally come to an intuitive practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think you narrowed it down. Those are the two people. Either you're really desperate or you're really bought into this world already. I would say I tend to see more of the people who bought into this world just based on my proximity, the fact that I live in the Bay Area in California. Folks are pretty open, pretty energy aware here already. That's not everyone for sure. And I've had people, get very angry at me. So my acupuncture clients, when I talk about intuition, they think it's totally BS, totally made up. As far as the people who are really desperate, they definitely have no idea what to expect. I think people who are in this world already, maybe they've already had readings, maybe they've worked with, even like a therapist who's really intuitive and willing to kind of bring his or her intuition into the session. And my session structure is a little bit fluid. I think if people have worked with me before, they know what to expect in that I'm going to ask you what we're going to focus on. And then I'm going to do my meditative thing and just read energy for a while and then let you ask questions and read the energy of your questions. The format I really like is one reading where we really kind of dredge up all that information, followed by 3 sort of integration sessions. In some ways, I think this intuitive medicine is not dissimilar from a psychedelic journey, which is very popular in California right now. And in a psychedelic journey, you go deep and sort of excavate these big insights, these peak experiences. But that is honestly worthless if you don't integrate it into who you are and how you're living your life. And so the same thing with a reading like this. We can have all these ooh and ah moments. I make people cry a lot. I make people gasp a lot. Cool, fine, good for my ego. But is that actually helping them evolve? Is that actually helping them heal? I think a lot of the way to answer yes to those questions is what happens after the session. How do you follow up? Almost like a health coach thing where you're sort of holding their feet to the fire around whatever comes up. I think that one of my skills is finding what I call the thing in someone. I'm good at going in there and being like, oh, here's the thing. You should really look at that. But I'm not a therapist. I'm not a physician. I don't do coaching. And so I love being able to then say, here's my list of recommended therapists. Please go talk to them about what we just discussed in this session. Or, same thing if it's a very medical thing. Like the other day I was working with a patient and she had that horizontal line across the bridge of her nose that indicates heart disease. Apparently this is a well-studied thing. I don't think that's a woo-woo thing. But I told her that and she went to her doctor and sure enough, all her cholesterol numbers were terrible and she talked about medication and all the rest of it. So again, in that case, it's like, okay, I saw it, but you have to go do something about it now. Seeing it isn't always the healing in itself. There's usually some kind of additional work that needs to get done.
Interesting. So you're almost like the detective who
Yes.
might find the things or help people be open to the ideas or whatever.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So could we talk a little bit about, my cat's about to jump on my keyboard. Could we talk a little bit about like, how do you know if something like a physical issue has an emotional component? Is that something that you would work with as well? Just a quick little interruption to say a big thank you to listening to the Pilates Lounge podcast. This podcast is all about sharing our love of movement and Pilates with as many people as possible. So if you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to review us so that we can get the word out there. Also, if you haven't joined us on the Pilates Muse newsletter, it's a bi-weekly newsletter that shares a whole load of information with you. And we also have virtual online education programs. So if you're looking to get inspired and grow even more as a Pilates professional, check us out, www.thepilatesprofessional.com.au. Back to the show.
That's really my specialty. And in some ways, I feel like a hack as an intuitive medicine practitioner or medical intuitive, because I think a lot of people hear that title and they think like what Carolyn Mace does. She's really good at like looking in your colon and finding exactly where the growth is and whether it's cancerous or not and referring you to the appropriate physician for that. I don't do that. I wish I did. It sounds really cool. The thing I'm really good at is going into your colon and being like, oh, you're holding like a really old sexual trauma here. I don't know when this happened, but we have to heal this. Otherwise, you're going to have diarrhea for the rest of your life. That's a real example that I did with someone. And so for me, that's how energy shows up. I'm very attuned to the emotional signature of energy in the body. In general, if you don't have that attunement, I do think if there's a persistent pain in the body that doesn't respond to the things you're supposed to do to make pain better, right? You've taken anti-inflammatories, you've done heat, you've done ice, maybe you've changed your diet, maybe you've done physical therapy or seen a chiropractor, and it's like, no, my neck, it's always a problem. I don't know why, but it's never getting better. To me, that points to some kind of emotional or energetic blockage, which is complicated. The emotional, energetic world and the physical worlds are co-creating each other all the time. And so, one of the examples I use is if someone's guarding their heart, they might hunch their shoulders forward to kind of protect their heart. And then they have this chronic shoulder pain because they have terrible posture. But that person might try to correct their posture and it just never sticks, never quite manages to break through that pattern because they have to address that shame or that fear of being seen before they can really change how they're moving through the world. So that connection, I think, is what's really interesting, is we have to address the physical side of things. I think where the woo-woo gets too woo-woo for me is when they sort of deny that the physical exists. Like, we definitely need to do physical medicine, and we also need to acknowledge the energetic and the emotional. And especially when something's just like stubborn and not responding to the physical interventions, I think that's a really good time to get curious about the possibility of some emotional thing underneath all of it.
I think that this is such good conversation for our Pilates professionals. In my industry, well, I'm not sure whether it's changing or not, or whether my practice has just changed over the years, but definitely a lot of us come into this because we're movers. We're naturally connected to our body. We love to move our body. We want to understand more about our body. But when we work with clients over the years, I definitely recognize that, while the symptom or the signs or the experience may be a physical experience, if we don't delve deeper to understand the emotions of the person, then whether or not we fix that shoulder or fix the lower back, it's going to represent itself somewhere else in the body.
Yes.
If we don't really start to understand the emotions. So now my conversation is always, because everybody comes to Pilates, this is the scan from my doctor. I've had the MRI, my back is cactus, so I've got this disc bulge, and they're so fixated on the physical aspect of their experience. So now my first question always is, how are you sleeping? How are your relationships? How are you feeling? What is your emotional experience right now? And that really starts to give us almost a pathway to the solution rather than just looking at the physicality of what's going on.
It's amazing to me how doctors don't factor that in. How can you not ask if someone's crazy stressed out, going through a divorce, sleeping 4 hours a night, when something's going on with their body? Of course, those things are related. It's so obvious to me. I also think
when we're working with people, and we do work in the physical, but like I just said, I think tapping into the emotional, or even just being open to conversations and not getting stuck on the MRI or the result or the scan or whatever the story is that people are getting told from the experts. What are some ways that we can help people resolve those stuck emotions in the body?
Yes. Well, I remembered I was going to say, so I'll insert that here because it's relevant. There's a great little book called Healing Back Pain by John Sarno.
Yes, so I love his work.
You know that book? Yeah. And he talks about how they've done autopsies of folks and found people had slipped discs and lived totally pain-free. And it's so interesting to me how the medical model really relies on these images as fact. Because we see this pattern in your spine, we've reduced your pain simply to this thing, which might not even be affecting it. That's so fascinating to me. And so getting people out of that narrative is really important. And I think using actual, studies like the one I just mentioned is important to help them realize it's possible to break that narrative. They're not stuck with this reality their physician has laid out for them. The way I deal with sort of moving through those patterns of stuckness, I do this in my program I just developed. I think so in my program, the first 6 weeks are all meditation and learning about energy, because I think you know your body better than anyone else does. So I want you to get really curious about this left shoulder pain that just won't go away. I want you to close your eyes and just be in it. I want you to hold it. I want you to see if any family members come to mind as you're sitting with it, and really try again to excavate any leads that might be there about the emotions going on here. And there's all these different maps of the body. You know, the left side is yin, the right side is yang. Usually the left has to do with women, the right might have to do with men more. There's, you know, the Chinese medicine channels. Oh, we have the large intestine channel going through the shoulder. What does large intestine is trying to let go of things? What are we not letting go of? And, you know, we could take these maps and really try to decode the pain in all these ways. Once we have an idea, once we're like, oh yeah, this is because I'm not letting go of that fight I had with my mom last year that really took a hit in our relationship. Once we have that lead, then you can work with the energy. Then you can start to, you know, I like emotional freedom technique. I like breath work. I like tapping. I like toning. I like writing a letter. I like hitting a couch with a foam bat. I think you just have to have a sense of what it is you're trying to release and then try out all these different techniques. And there's so many of them and every body responds differently, but try some of them out and just see, like, my pain was an 8 out of 10 before I tapped. I just did my tapping and now it's a 7 out of 10. Not a huge improvement, but look, I'm going in the right direction. I'm going to stick with this tool. There's something here for me. And just the way we're talking about how practitioners have intuition, patients have intuition too. And so I think as you're looking for the tools that are right for you, you just really trust your intuition. You listen to the options and you kind of follow your nose, which is the one that's lighting up that you're really curious about. It's always a journey, right? I think healing is always a journey. It's not linear. It's not simple. It doesn't always make sense. But I think if you stick with it, you always get what you need. I really think that.
Yeah, it's such a powerful practice to be teaching our clients, but also a powerful practice for us to be working on ourselves. Yeah, one thing I always will say to clients, because they do get so fixated on these results from the tests or whatever, and I always ask them, so what did the MRI look like before you were in pain? Mm-hmm. And they're like, I didn't get one. Exactly. So if you didn't have any test result to show you what is your baseline, but here you are getting fixated on this one result that you're looking at, like you're in the weeds at the moment. If you step back, and are you going to get another test once you're not in pain or once you're not experiencing this? Well, you're not, are you? So all you're really looking for is relief from the experience. And if you really sat with yourself and listen to your body, listen to the whispers, then you probably had the answers anyway, but you let it get to this point. So what is it that you're refusing to deal with to be unstuck or whatever it is?
I think that's exactly right. And, you know, I love the phrase that life sends pebbles and then rocks and then boulders. And it's exactly what you said. Listen to the whispers, listen to the pebbles. You don't want to get to rock stage, and you especially don't want to get to boulder stage. What I find in my practice is that pebbles are the easiest to deal with. Rocks are when people come to see someone like me, and boulders are really hard to treat. Boulders are like a cancer diagnosis or some kind of structural anomaly that really is causing a terrible nerve pattern that's going to be really hard to unwind. So I guess the question then that I really pose to all your listeners, because I think Pilates instructors are seeing people at the whisper pebble stage, is how do we get them to pay attention? How can we do our best to steer them away from the boulder stage? I think that's a beautiful offering that people in this line of work can give other folks.
And what's your answer to it? How do we?
I think it really depends on the person. I think, you know, one of the things I like about Pilates is you're really developing a beautiful one-on-one relationship often. And so you're getting to know that person and you're getting to know what they respond to. You understand what motivates them. You understand if they're more left-brained or right-brained. And all of that knowledge helps you have conversations that they can receive. Because I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of this information, if it's just like out on the internet, it's targeting a broad audience. And your client might not fit in that audience or might have a lot of resistance to some of that messaging. So what kind of messaging would really get through to him or her so that she feels seen and is ready to take some action?
Yeah, I agree. So how do you think movement plays a role in healing? Do you feel like, does movement help release stuck emotions, experiences? Talk me through that from your perspective.
Yeah, I have two answers to that. The first is there's a very famous Chinese medicine quote, like maybe the most famous, which says, where there is stagnation, there is pain. Where there is no stagnation, there is no pain. And so in Chinese medicine, all pain is a lack of movement. It's energy and blood that is not moving. And so that doesn't necessarily mean movement is the answer, because for some kinds of stagnations, you move and it's so jammed up that the attempt to move it causes more pain. You need a more sophisticated way of moving. But at the end of the day, movement is the solution to pain. Getting your energy, your blood moving through your body unobstructed is what resolves pain. The second answer to that question is, I think when it comes to emotions, it's a little cheesy, but I like the phrase, emotions are energy in motion. And I always think of emotions like a wave, like it needs to move through you. It needs to sort of crash and, fan itself out. And I think a lot of people are terrified of having emotions move through them. The idea of that wave feels so overwhelming, like it's going to flatten them or it's going to change them in this really terrible way. They're not going to be able to deal with it. It's like the tidal wave that's just destructive. And so for people who have emotional constipation, it's finding ways to move those emotions that feel safe. And so often that means working with a practitioner. This is part of why I love referring folks to therapists. And oftentimes we start small. So if the shoulder pains from that big fight I had with mom last year, well, maybe that was really scary for me and I'm not ready to look at that yet, but I am ready to move with the emotion of the fight I had with my husband last week. Like that's still in me and I can feel how I kind of pushed it down, but I'm ready to let that one up and out. And then maybe I'll get to mom in a month when I'm getting more accustomed to moving my emotions this way. And in Chinese medicine, the different emotions like to move in different ways. Some of them are obvious, like for grief, you have to cry. You have to cry and cry. And I know there are people who are grieving who feel like it's, interminable. Like I've cried an ocean. How are there more tears? But that is how we deal with grief. We let out all these tears. For anger, I think anger is an especially physical emotion. And so that's where I like having people do the, like punch a pillow, use a tennis racket on the couch, go for a sprint, yell in a car. There has to be this sort of like big outward expression. I think, it's almost like have a little temper tantrum by yourself without hurting anyone else in order to let that out. I think a lot of people who repress their anger are sort of at risk of letting that anger out inappropriately. And honestly, I think this is where like domestic violence comes in, road rage. There's just when people get triggered and they don't know how to deal with their anger in a healthy way, it can be so destructive. So finding a place to let that sort of energy out without aiming it at any other human being, I think is really, really important. I do think anger and grief are some of the biggest emotions people stuff inside of them. I think resentment, irritability, those are forms of anger. And then I think fear is the last one. And fear is a tricky one. They say that fear freezes the chi. It like stops it in its action. And I think we feel that when you think about fear, there's this sort of like paralyzing quality to it. And there's different approaches to that for sure. I really think with fear, working with someone outside of you can be especially helpful, who can sort of normalize just like what a life can be. I think a lot of fear is like that it's the same as the patient who's trapped in their narrative about, well, my doctor said this, and so that's my reality. So you need someone to be like, hey, listen, there's other realities. You don't have to be stuck in that cold, paralyzed fear reality. Why don't we try some other options on? And, there are therapists who specialize in like somatic experiencing or somatic techniques who can lead clients through a lot of that. And I think that is a wonderful referral. If you're like, man, I've been working with Peggy and that left shoulder pain, it's not going away. I just have a feeling there's something emotional in there. Have her talk to a somatic therapist or a somatic experiencing therapist, especially if you know there has been any kind of trauma. And in my mind, trauma is just an experience the organism was not equipped to handle in the moment that it happened. So, trauma can be a car crash. Trauma can be getting yelled at when you were having a bad day. But if you suspect there was something that overwhelmed this person, great time to refer to a somatic therapist who can explore how that's living in them.
Yeah, and I often wonder, like, with all, so you talk about there's the fear and the anger and the sadness that, especially in our society, in Western society, in fact, in Australia, even worse than America. My husband is American. You guys are actually much better at sharing your emotions than Australians. We do not do that. It's been something that I've had to learn. So we have a lot of repressed emotions, and I feel like though the sadness layers on top of the guilt, on top of the abandonment, on top of the fear, and it becomes this whole orchestra of repressed emotion. How do we even begin to unstuck that? How do we even begin to realize that maybe that's partly what our experience is?
Man, that's such a big question. For that person who recognizes there's a whole backlog of tickets that need to be addressed, I really think some sort of structured approach would be ideal. With a practitioner is the very best, I think. But if you can't do that for whatever reason, just setting aside time for like a daily meditation practice where, one of the most famous meditation techniques is Vipassana, where you just scan your body from head to toe and toe to head. Just doing that at the end or the beginning of every day for 20 minutes. Just notice what's there. Oh, look, there's all this like warmth built up in my chest right now. And it's even more today because I had that fight with my wife yesterday. That's just interesting. I'm just going to look at that. I think a meditation practice is a really great start. And the obvious pairing to a meditation practice is a journaling practice where you write about what you find. And so even if you're not ready to talk to another human being about your emotions, you're at least able to acknowledge them to yourself. That's got to be the first step, right? Before you can talk to anyone else and sort of be really vulnerable and present, you have to know what's going on inside you. So that's where I would start is a deeper self-awareness practice through meditation and journaling. And again, if there's any way you can do that with a teacher, in a program, with a practitioner, I think you'll go a lot further with the work if you have that outside help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, certainly in this country, people don't see therapists like they do in the States and even in Europe. There's a real stigma to it. People probably utilize alcohol as a suppressor big time. I know as a family of non-drinkers, we are very much on the outside. It's quite fascinating. But
I noticed that when I was living in New Zealand. When I was living in New Zealand, there was, and this is, 20 years ago, but they were doing this big campaign to stop female drinking in particular because women were just drinking their emotions away. And it was a huge problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I feel like even as a Pilates instructor, it is up to us just even to plant the seed. It's not up to us to act as the practitioner, but just to plant the seed, just to open a conversation and to ask things like, what, do you drink alcohol or, what are your daily habits like? Just to start to open it up, I think is super important because we are working with people in pain who absolutely are living with repressed emotions, suppressed emotions, and a lot of anxiety. So are there some things that we could do to bring awareness to or looking for as Pilates instructors or movement educators that might improve how we screen clients or how we approach a client who may be holding on to emotions?
Yeah, it's a nice practical question. The thing I'll lead with is that we teach best by example. And so doing some of this work yourself so that you are very connected to your body, you are very connected to your emotions, you know how to release your emotions, you know how to share your emotions. There can be a real learning curve for that, even for practitioners, and you can't teach what you don't know. So really getting to know that for yourself. And I really feel like patients can sense when we've done the work. And so when you approach them from that place, there's a different tenor for the interaction. There's a way that they trust you more, or there's a confidence that you can speak with that I think is really compelling. As far as screening, all the questions you mentioned are great. It's a lot of lifestyle questions, right? Sleep, alcohol consumption, stress, relationships. All those things are very, very important and probably things that someone who has largely interacted with the Western medical system might not even it might not even occur to them that those could be related to what they're feeling in their pain body. I think a lens that's very popular right now that I think speaks well to this population is the nervous system. People are happy to talk about the nervous system. We can talk about nervous system dysregulation. We can talk about neuroinflammation. I think when you frame it that way, people feel like it's a little more scientific and impersonal. And also there's so much actual data, studies about the way things like stress and sleep and alcohol affect the nervous system. And so then you're not coming from like this woo-woo place or this potentially judgmental place. You're just talking about the science of what is affecting your nervous system right now. Your nervous system is activated. How do we get your nervous system to chill out again? And I think framing it that way, again, like where it's less accusatory and judgmental and more of like disarming, I think people respond really well to that.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Hey, tell me, Courtney, if any of our listeners did want to work with you, can you tell us a little bit more about your program that you're just running?
Yeah, I really love it. I called it the Liberated Body because, I think people who are in pain feel really shackled and want to feel free. And so again, it's 6 weeks at the beginning of meditation instruction and education about energy. And in those first 6 weeks, I also address the physical, like we're talking about. So I encourage them to do a simple elimination diet. I have them check in with how much sleep they get, how much water they drink, how much alcohol they drink, do they smoke cigarettes? We need those metrics. I tell a lot of people, if we excavate all this awesome emotional stuff and you release your grief and you're smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, we're not going to get very far. Or if there's a mold toxicity problem in your home, we're not going to get very far. So we have to start with the physical. We start with some education. We start with meditation. And then the second half of the program is all these tools to try to release that. And, some of it's journaling exercises, making boundaries. Some of it's actual physical things that I want people to try out, breath work. I give you a whole smorgasbord because everyone is so different. I just want to give you a bunch of things to try out. We even talk about posture because, again, I think after 3 months, it's a 3-month program. I think after 3 months of this internal work, you are more ready to shift externally. That's a great time to go get a massage, see your chiropractor, have someone do this physical intervention after you've done internal work. That can be an incredible combo. Things can really open up after that experience. It's called The Liberated Body, and there's information on my website. My name is Courtney Moore, so my website's CourtneyMooreWellness.com. And people can sign up. It's an evergreen program. It's always rolling. And everyone in the program gets a medicine reading with me. So at some point, I'll do an hour call with everyone who enrolls. And I think of that as sort of like checking their work, like just making sure they're on the right path, making sure they haven't overlooked some glaring energetic thing that I can notice and sort of give them some clues about where to focus their energies.
That's awesome. So for our listeners to jump on to Courtney's website, we will have the show notes at the end of the podcast. You can check that out, but you can find Courtney at www.courtneymorewellness.com. But just check out in the show notes. I've got one more question for you before we go. And I ask this to all of my guests. If you could have a conversation with your younger self, now that you've learned all that you know about your body and all that you know about what it is that you're sharing with people, what would you say to yourself?
How much younger? How far back are we going?
Your choice. It's your journey.
I say that because I definitely lived the wounded healer archetype. And the first 20 years of my life were so hard, and I hated myself so much, and I was so uncomfortable in my body, and I hated my body so much, and it felt so hopeless. And I guess if there was a way to give myself some sense of hope, I would certainly start there. But I'm wanting to give younger me even a little more wisdom because I had this really hard childhood. My mom died. My dad was abusive. We moved all the time. I felt so alone. And of course, all of that was somaticized, that was my journey into Chinese medicine. Once I started getting acupuncture, I had skin problems. I went to an acupuncturist. She gave me a treatment. I started crying. I didn't understand why. And she explained, well, the lungs are connected to the skin and the lungs are connected to grief. And it seems like all this grief in your lungs is causing some skin problems. So I guess, I mean, again, I'm not sure how to tell younger me this, but some clue that everything she's experiencing emotionally that was so hard and so isolating was living in the body still. And I would have to find a way to unlock that door to really feel better. Because that was true. Things just got harder and harder and harder until I started doing some somatic healing. I was getting acupuncture, doing yoga, getting chiropractic, and all of a sudden everything started opening, which wasn't easy. It's not like, oh, and then it was lovely. But then the real work that needed to happen could happen. And I would love for her to know that.
And do you think that hard path that you had in those younger years was the gift for who you are now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My favorite teacher, I did a 2-year post-grad program with him, and the homework he gave all of us was figure out where in your life you've been identifying as a victim and stop doing that. And, it sounds simple. It's certainly not easy. And for me, it was that, I had been the little girl who lost her mommy, and I got so much sympathy and pity from that. And when I gave that up, I could really see how everything in my life had happened for me. All of it created who I am today. I like who I am today. I feel great purpose living the life that I have today. I know I couldn't show up for people the way I do if I hadn't had every experience that I had. And so at this point, there's no, resentment or blaming or regret. It's all just gratitude for the wisdom of the goddess as she shows us the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Courtney, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. I love it when, I love about the podcast partly is getting to meet people just like you, is getting to have these conversations, that it's a normal conversation, that it's not out there, that it, I know it, and we get to share it with our listeners. I think that these conversations need to be easier for us. And they need to be more common, more regular. So thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And I do hope that we open the heart of some of our listeners today to maybe explore some of their own potential, some of their own emotions, and tap into their own intuition. Courtney Moore. So thank you for joining us. To our listeners, make sure that you join us next week for another episode. We are counting down the weeks to the end of the year, everybody. So I think after this episode, there's only going to be about 3 more, and then it's literally Christmas. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I just said that. But I hope that you can join us next time. My name's Katie Crane. This is the Pilates Lounge. I'll see you next week.